And free thought thinkers, atheists, agnostics, and others. This is a show for them, for you, for people committed to rational thinking, and for those who are rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs. And I want to welcome you to the program.
Right. Well, today's show topic is Elizabeth Cady Stanton and women's suffrage.
We have a guest today, written and spoken quite a lot on women's suffrage, and especially the notable role played by Tennessee. And her name is Dr. Wanda Sobiesky, right?
Very good.
And I probably won't even be brave enough to try and pronounce all that. But before we get into the program, we first want to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has fun meetups at a bar or eatery. Mm-hmm. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's in the Old City, starting at around 5:30, before this show actually ends. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Okay. And the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. And the second Sunday is book club discussion. The fourth Sunday is a get-together called Reflection. It's featuring a potluck lunch, and you're welcome, usually in someone's home.
All right, visit our websites for additional details, the exact times and locations. All right, moving on to In the News. With the recent human tragedy in the wake of typhoon, whose name I may not pronounce it well at all, Haiyan, coming out of the Philippines, secular groups have been stepping up to offer ways to donate, which will not subsidize the delivery of useless things like Bibles or any help with strings attached.
And there are secular organizations to which non-believers can donate in times of need. The Foundation Beyond Belief is working with the CDRC, the Citizen Disaster Response Center. According to the Foundation Beyond Belief Crisis webpage, 100% of the donations will be forwarded to CDRC through the course of the drive. And more details about this on http://foundation.org/crisis.
All right. The Center for Inquiry website also hosts a link for the Skeptics and Humanists Aid and Relief Effort, or SHARE. Every dollar you give to SHARE will be sent directly to Oxfam, a secular organization fully invested in typhoon relief. More details are at their website, centerforinquiry.net. All right. Well, viewers, this is a call-in show, and today we have with us Wanda, whose last name I'll not try to pronounce, an attorney and champion of Tennessee history, and especially about the adoption of the 19th Amendment. So, Wanda, thanks for coming to the studio today. Today's topic was chosen because this is the birth anniversary of Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
And here's a copy of her.
I sent out a solicitation a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, we should talk about Elizabeth on her birthday, especially because her birthday is happening on a show day. And Joe volunteered to try and review the Woman's Bible.
It's a heavy read. It's small print, too.
And then it was what? It was just about 8 days ago, you did a presentation at RET that just tied right in on this, and so we strong-armed you into coming today, and we want to thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I'm all for you just redoing that whole show you gave to us at RET, but you tell us where you want to start.
That would probably take way too much time. This would be Elizabeth Cady Stanton's 198th birthday.
198.
If she were with us.
So in 2 more years, it's a bicentennial.
Of her birthday, that's correct.
Now, it won't be on a show date here, but maybe you'll come back that week and we'll do this again.
We'll see. Okay. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, along with Susan B. Anthony, are generally credited with starting and sustaining the suffrage movement. And I'm sure you know, and stop me whenever you think I'm getting repetitious, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott both were Quakers by faith. And out of that religious faith grew an appreciation for equality, because amongst the available religions at the time, it was the most equal. Not all, not completely equal, but at least it was more egalitarian than most. And it gave a sense of fairness to both of them. And they took that sense of fairness into their work as abolitionists and sometimes even in the temperance movement.
Well, another important Quaker I know of would be Benjamin Franklin. And, I mean, especially with Lucretia Mott, her life would have overlapped with Ben Franklin's. It makes me wonder, could they have ever met each other?
I wouldn't be surprised. She ran in some pretty impressive circles at the time.
And I also know that, you know, Ben Franklin had kind of a desire for separation of church and state. He was often critical about some of the excesses of religion. And I suspect it may be at his urging that our Constitution has in it this clause about when you go to take an oath of office that you either swear or affirm. And the affirmation was important because Quakers were not allowed to swear on anything.
Yeah, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. I mean, that's right. That's the New Testament.
Okay.
You know, from that point of view, swearing would be taking the name of the Lord in vain.
Well, and if they felt that the word swear was just objectionable in any context, maybe that helps explain why they said, you know, you got to give us a way out here.
Yeah.
It could be. That could be.
All righty.
So anyway, Susan B. Anthony became obviously quite involved in the suffrage movement, and her background was from the Quaker faith as well. Mm-hmm. So
I didn't know that.
For Elizabeth Cady Stanton, I think she began frustrated with the fact that traditional religion or organized religion put women in a secondary place.
Yeah.
And so as she worked in the suffrage movement, she became more and more aware of the inconsistencies in the way that we treat men and women legally, but also became quite aware of the fact that a lot of the opposition to women's suffrage came from churches and in the name of religion, and mostly in the name of organized religion. And they were forever running into religious objections to changing the position of women. I mean, you have to realize that in the second half of the 1800s, women not only couldn't vote, they had no rights at all to their children. Their husbands could give them away without any kind of permission from the woman. They had, if they were married, no right to hold the property. They had very limited occupations open to them.
Even property that they had before marriage?
Absolutely, it became her husband's.
Yeah.
And if, as a matter of fact, Elizabeth Cady Stanton became involved and interested in the women's issues when she was 9 years old, and her father, who was a lawyer at the time, was advising a young woman who had come to see him because her husband had died, and so the farm that they had passed to her son, who happened to be a drunk, and he threw her off of the property.
Her own
son did, and so she went to Mr. Cady Stanton to get some response, some help legally, and he told her there was really nothing he could do for her. That was the law, and that really upset
a kid is taught a sense of fairness early in life.
Well, Elizabeth went out reportedly and told the woman as she was crying and leaving her father's office, "Don't you worry about it. I'll go tear those laws out of his books when he's gone." And I think that was her start.
All right. Well, yeah, it's interesting you say that. When I was learning the history of Western civilization, I was introduced to this term primogeniture, which is something...
Primogeniture.
There we go. Primogeniture, which is the inheritance by not merely the sons, but the first son.
Right.
And how I think in the English nobility they were trying to make sure that estates didn't dissipate through multiple descendants, but it then created this sort of, let's call it an unemployment problem for all the non-first sons and daughters. And I'm a little surprised that there was something like that going on here. I kind of thought that with our break with England that we had broken from those kind of laws. Would that have been in many states? Any idea?
Well, in most states, women could not own property before the late 1800s. Married women. Because once you were married, what happened was when we adopted English common law, and with English common law came the notion that when a woman married, and the man and woman married, they became one, and the one was the man. And so she had no separate legal existence. She couldn't vote, she couldn't enter contracts, she had no right to her own wages, her husband could collect them and spend them as he wished, she had no right to the children. She became the legal subservient in virtually every important way.
Yeah, I remember when in my early 20s we were preparing for a marriage ceremony, and it never occurred to me, love, honor, and obey. And I told the minister, I'm not going to marry a child. So, and my wife thought it was, it didn't occur to her, this is ridiculous. So we just, you took it out. It's embarrassing to think that you'd refer to another human being and you obey.
Well, Lucretia Mott may be the first woman who refused to say obey in a marriage ceremony, which put her at some odds with her religious leaders, even in the Quaker faith. But she got married anyway.
So Mr. Mott must have been quite the man as well. I think I remember, was he the chair of the slavery convention? Or no, he was the chair of their convention, the women's convention. There was something, I think, awkward where he had to chair because women weren't allowed to.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but there were a number of women's conventions that were held all over the country after the Seneca Falls, and at many of those, women couldn't even speak. So they would debate women's rights, and they would debate it by having two men up there debating women's rights.
Well, there's a seminary in Texas in which the president's wife can teach in the seminary as long as she's teaching women in the class. But she can't have a course with men in the class. And that's now one of the largest seminaries in the country, Southwestern Baptist.
That somehow doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Elizabeth Cady Stanton approached the question of religion, and particularly writing the Women's Bible, originally thinking that she needed to just reinterpret the Bible, that somewhere in the translations from Hebrew and Greek and so forth, there had just been a male bias interjected into the Bible. And so that was really her premise that she started with. And even Lucy Stone went so far as to learn Greek and Hebrew so that she could retranslate the Bible to try to make it less sexist in its application. And there's no doubt, I think, that there is male bias in the translation of the Bible. But I think by the end of her life, she had pretty much come to the conclusion that it wasn't just the translation.
It's in the text itself,
That the text itself had bias issues for women.
Well,
So the woman you said who learned the Greek and Hebrew, her name again?
Lucy Stone.
There we go. And so Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others, there was a committee of several women, but I think I read a reference to the fact that it may have been, I don't know, like 5 that were primarily, but that she actually had contributions from many dozens of others.
I think 26.
And that's why I said many dozens. That would be a little over 2. Okay. And it struck me every time I read this that their names weren't listed. And it made me want to know, those people and what's their story and how were they brave enough to stick their necks out into what could be a firestorm.
And it was a firestorm. It was a firestorm even in Elizabeth Cady Stanton's own organization, the national organization that she chaired for suffrage.
Now, this was during the last few years of her life, and
yes.
And am I remembering she lost the chairmanship over it?
I think she was still president. She just wasn't very active.
Maybe she didn't get reelected then.
There was a lot of division, and you see it even now in social issues. Some people want to focus only on a single social issue, and as soon as you start getting a lot more people interested in whatever your topic is that you're trying to change, it becomes harder to have multiple issues that you agree on. And so for some, the strategy was focus on suffrage and only suffrage, and so the Women's Bible was viewed as a distraction and an impediment because it really infuriated people.
Oh, yeah.
But it did sell well.
Well, I read this, but of course, those who've studied the Bible know you have a very strong male bias.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, the whole notion of the sons inherit.
Right.
And
Well, there was.
you don't see as many female heroes.
Well, not
in
just
the Bible.
that, a lot of people take the premise to be that sin came into the world because of women. That it was Eve that tempted Adam
The New Testament says that
and brought the world to destruction.
That the woman was deceived, and that's why she's to remain silent, and all those other things.
The logic is, now this is a male making a silly argument like this, that she was the first. Now there's Adam saying, I see her sinning. I think I'll do the same thing. Now, who's the dumbest?
Well, or put another way, it took only a mortal to tempt Adam, and it took the devil himself to get Eve to sin. So.
Even then, as a snake,
Right.
had to sneak in.
Yes.
So you could say he did it with his eyes wide open, and she was deceived.
There you go. There you go. So there's a lot of argument about Adam and Eve, though, that got into the suffrage debates, and that was a big frustration. And of course, Paul, and the teachings of Paul and his.
Now, some scholars think 1 Timothy, for example, is not written by Paul. That was more of after the church got to be more hierarchical.
I think Paul, or
Only in first.
Bart Ehrman, he refers to that as pseudo-epigraphia.
Oh, yeah.
They're writing under someone else's name because their own name isn't authoritative.
Well, that's what he has a whole book on that.
Wow. Okay.
So, man, we kind of jumped right to the end of her life. I kind of assumed we'd approach this more chronological.
Okay.
And when I was brushing up on Miss Stanton's life, I was kind of I noticed something that in a sense seems a little awkward, and that is that apparently she had a vigorous intellectual life in Boston, and due to her husband's health, they moved to Seneca Falls, New York, where she did no longer had intellectual opportunities, and she chafed under the restricted role of basically raising kids. And there was numerous references to how, and it was hard to get good servants. And well, that sort of smacked against my egalitarian approach. But apparently, her husband being a lawyer, they would have been kind of well-to-do, middle class, and that it would have been common then to have household servants, and that it would free up the time of a middle-class wife like Elizabeth, where she could pursue intellectual activities. And I couldn't help but think that if I had her here, I'd say, so what do you think about the intellectual opportunities of your servants? Are you looking after them? If you could channel her, how do you think she might respond? Do you know enough of her personality?
I don't know that I can really be so sure. I'd like to think that she views it the same way a lot of people do now. If you hire someone to cut your grass, it's not because you view them as servant. You think you're giving them perhaps an opportunity.
We've got a phone call. Let's see what.
Okay.
Go ahead. We've got a caller.
Push the on button.
Hello,
caller.
Hey, how you doing today?
Okie doke. Please give us a name or a nickname and speak up if you would.
Yeah, we can't hear you too well.
My name is John.
John. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
for calling. And do you have a question or a comment? And go for it.
Well, honestly, I'm kind of new to this. I just came across the show here. I've seen as God sexist. I mean, what is it supposed to be about on this part?
Well,
Okay.
this is Freethought Forum. We're a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Today, our program is centered around Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who is important in developing the organizations that allowed women, or whereby women gained the right to vote. But she herself felt that the Christian Bible was a significant obstacle to women's rights. So that's the nature of today's conversation.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, John?
Yeah, you definitely did. I'm a Christian myself too, but the atheism thing and is God sexist kind of just caught me off guard.
Do you think that God treats women as equals? That Jehovah, the God of
Honestly, yes, and to the point is God don't judge either.
So God doesn't judge. I guess I kind of thought the whole Bible was all about judgments, both that happened and are to come.
How often do you read it?
Well, I've read the whole thing once.
Well, the fact is, the Bible's is not one book. It's a whole library that was written over centuries. So you have a great number of diverse opinions.
And I mentioned your credentials.
And so you could defend either view and other views in between from the Bible.
So John, when Yahweh drowned everyone except for Noah and his family, was that not a kind of a judgment?
I mean, everybody's got their own kind of judgment part on that either, too. But God also says you can make your own choices and you can make your own, it's kind of hard to explain on that part, to be honest with you.
Well, you've got a good point.
But
it is hard, especially drowning.
Everybody does have their own beliefs.
All right. Well, in the Bible it also says, and this is New Testament, that the woman was the one deceived, and so she's to remain silent and not have authority over a man. Is that sexist, John?
No, I mean, it all depends on your part. Well, I mean, what do you believe about it?
Well, he was asking you. You're not backing off, are you?
Oh, I never do.
Okay.
Okay, well, I would believe that would be called sexist. It's treating women as different and specifically denying them rights and opportunities in their lives.
Yeah, that's sexist. I mean, there's sexism in the
So, John,
Bible.
do you...
And there's also parts in the Bible that's not sexist. And there's a passage in Paul that's clearly not sexist, but they're all passages that are attributed to Paul that are clearly sexist.
Yeah.
So people pick and choose.
Too.
Go ahead.
I said, yeah, that's understandable too. But my part is wondering,
Jump in if you want.
is like something like the part of the apple on the tree, the snake, this and that.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody has a punishment, right?
Go ahead.
So
Let me ask you this.
that-
Is that a basis to send most of the human race to hell?
No.
Okay, I agree with you.
Well, and I think when you're talking about sexism, you need to think about, even if, just for purposes of a hypothesis, you say that Eve brought sin into the world because she's the first person that sinned. Is it right to blame all women forever for one person's mistake?
No, ma'am.
And that's the sort of thing, that sort of stereotyping was the sort of thing I think that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was very upset about.
Yeah.
That some of these stories, whether they're true or not, really don't justify treating women as second-class citizens legally for the rest of eternity.
Could you say this? There are parts of the Bible that are really humane and decent.
There are.
And there are parts of the Bible that are vicious and mean and just sadistic. And
Old Testament particularly.
So it depends on the preacher as to which parts of these he's going to select to emphasize.
Well, and that's...
Let's not ignore our caller. John, did you hear Joe's point? Can you comment on that? John, did you hear Joe's point?
Oh, yes, sir.
Could you comment on that? That Joe said, parts of the Bible are nice and humane, others are sadistic.
He's very on point about it, to be honest with you. He really is. But I mean, my understanding is actually understood now because of what y'all are talking about, and I'm more understandable about it too.
Well, that's great. John, let's explain. The Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are local groups, and on Tuesday nights, it's actually starting almost as we speak. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is going to be members of, are going to be down in the Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Old City, where I often have a bowl of soup or some pizza, and we want to invite you to come down and talk to us if you'd like to, as we said earlier in the show, so long as we don't have to preach, punch, or proselytize. And you know, this is the kind of thing that actually many of our members enjoy, is discussing biblical criticism. Many non-believers came to non-belief because they were deeply interested in the Bible and researched it and decided it was not true. All right, John, are you local?
Yes, sir.
All right, and you said this is the first time you've watched the show.
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, well, that's great.
Would you believe there are parts of the Bible you believe?
What is it?
Would you believe that, are there parts of the Bible you believe and parts of the Bible you don't believe? Now, you don't have to answer that. That's just...
No, I do. I want to answer it.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, my beliefs about the Bible is they're like on a true story book. Like you read a book that's based on a true story. But you're going to have bits and pieces that are not in that book. Like I believe that in the Bible, not everything is there like it's supposed to be. That's my belief.
Which is true.
But
Okay, that's all right.
So, John,
Written by people.
doesn't that mean that it's unreliable?
there's some ways and there's some ways not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wrote a book, but you wouldn't use it to lay brick or build a house. It depends on what you use it for.
All right.
At least I hope you wouldn't.
So, I was, you know, I asked about if you're local or not because we like to know how people found us, and we want to say thanks for calling. And what we would like to clear the line. We've only got the one line, and we hope we'll get a few more callers.
Yeah, I want to thank you for calling in.
And my offer is genuine. If you want to talk further, we'll be down in the Old City this evening.
Yes, sir. I'll see you all there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was a nice conversation. I forgot where we were when the call came in.
I was interested when you spoke once before. I was shocked at how the chauvinism of our history, the male chauvinism. I'm just astonished at what some men did to keep women from voting.
Well, you know, just to put things in context, we still don't have equal rights. The 14th Amendment is still not giving women
only
the protection that it gives to men or to other groups, religious groups, racial groups, other what they call suspect classes, the Supreme Court calls. So it's pretty disturbing to me that it's taken so long. And just the fact that maybe probably few of your viewers are aware of is that it wasn't until 1952 that women in Tennessee were considered competent enough to serve on juries.
Isn't that amazing?
Even after they had the right to vote another 32 years.
My mother, at probably the age of 20-something, defended her brother in court. And she didn't even have a law degree. And I remember the judge came down 20 years later, admiring her courage.
Well, there were some women practicing law who could represent a client in court but not sit on a jury.
Yeah.
How much sense does
amazing?
that make?
No sense at all.
Well, it just shows it just goes to show that if you run important aspects of society based on tradition, you can get some deep ruts that are utterly unjust, and people will try and sustain them by saying, well, we've always done it that way. Within the Freethought community, we often find ourselves battling the religious organizations getting a free ride from government in the form of they get to do their prayers before government meetings, or they get to have their the little Christ in the manger scene. There's a word for that. The nativity, the nativity on courthouse lawns. And well, goodness, they've got churches. Put it on their own property. Where are they getting this sense of entitlement to get a free ride on government property? And so that's and they justify it by saying, well, we've always done it. We've always done it.
Well, I'm glad Cain didn't take that view, but otherwise we'd have murderers just being testified.
Exactly.
Well, when I was reading the Women of Seneca Falls to try and get ready for today's meeting, I was also surprised to learn about how Elizabeth Stanton, as well as Susan B. Anthony, went on speaking tour. Because I'd heard so much about how it was sort of verboten for women to speak. I think perhaps it was during their lifetimes they themselves forged a real change.
There was a very big change from the time they started in 1848 until their death in the early 1900s. And they brought a lot of that around just by sheer fortitude, staying with it through the crises and through the hard times.
Well, as I read that, it raised more questions in my mind, and one of them was, man, are there transcripts of any of those speeches?
Yes.
And so, and I'm so glad you were. I was worried I was catching you blank. So have you read some?
I have. I've read some of them, and
well,
some
all right.
of them.
Well, after the show, you're going to email me some, right?
One of the problems with women's history is it's never really been accorded much importance. When I went to high school and I read about the suffrage movement, there was one sentence in my high school textbook, and all it said was, in 1920, Congress gave women the right to vote.
Really?
Well, that's not true. It took 72 years of battle to get the right to vote.
And it's funny that it said Congress gave. Well, okay, Congress passes a bill and the states approve, but women won the right to vote is the right way to say.
Exactly. It wasn't given, that's for sure.
So I was in high school. It was in 10th grade I learned about this. This would have been 1975. And I know I heard about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and I know I heard about Susan B. Anthony. I don't know that I heard any of the other names, but those two names I know I heard about. And I also know, and part of why it was brought up is the resistance they had to going along with, it would be the 14th Amendment that gave African Americans the right to vote, but did not include them, 15th. And that kind of caused a split.
We have a speaker.
We got a caller?
A caller. Go ahead.
Give us a name or a nickname, please.
You're on.
My name's Amanda.
Go, Amanda.
Okay, I really do not believe that God is sexist, because in the Bible it says that men and women will both be serving. So I don't believe that could be possible, and I believe that prayer does work, because God has saved my life several times.
Okay.
Well, the big problem I think we're raising, you have a good point, is does the Bible have sexism in it? And it clearly does. Now, you're talking from personal experience, and that's another.
No, in the Bible, if you actually read all of it, instead of just reading one little line, if you read before and after, it explains itself a little bit more than just taking the one verse and going by the one single verse.
Now, why would you assume that I'm, for example, taking only one verse and you're taking all the Bible? How'd you figure that out?
I didn't really figure that out. I've just read the Bible several times over through and through, because I was once at a point where I did not believe.
Okay.
So Joe, tell us about your career.
Well,
I'm a caregiver and
go ahead.
Stay at home. I have children.
Sure. Well.
So that's basically what I do.
That's a good job. Go ahead.
Yes. But I just believe that, I've read several verses, and I believe that, when they did the translations to the Bible, that they didn't translate it exactly the right way. Well, that they took some words and reversed them.
Do you cover your head when you go out?
No, I do not.
The Bible tells you to do that,
You know what that means when they say to cover your head?
Well, you
It says to cover your head with God, not with a garment.
You look it up in 1 Corinthians, it doesn't have that in the way you put it. That's the way
You're reading the NIV version, right?
you take any version you want, and what you're saying
no,
is...
if you read the King James version, it says it's completely different.
Okay, you and I differ on that, okay? I don't agree with you, but you have a right to...
Okay, that's fine. I mean, you know, I'm not trying to disagree with you or anything
that's
like
not
that.
what she wrote
I
the
completely...
Yes.
But I don't
I
think...
completely understand what you're saying, but no, I do not cover my head when I go out.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you don't.
I wear pants. I don't wear...
You know, my father-in-law...
Joe, I think Amanda wanted to speak.
Oh,
to
yeah,
it.
go ahead, yeah.
Amanda, I just wanted to say you have obviously something in common with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, because when she wrote the Women's Bible, she began with the premise that a lot of it had been mistranslated, and that's where a lot of the sexism came from, and that's probably true. And one of the things she said that I'm glad to be able to be here to discuss is, in her words, she said, "It is not Christianity, but priestcraft that has subjected woman as we find her. The church and state have been united, and it's well for us to see it so." And I think what she was trying to say was, it wasn't so much the religion or spirituality on its own as it was the way men interpreted it and applied it that made women subjected to a lower position.
That is correct. That is correct. God did not want us women to be any less. It says that we should be equal with our husbands.
There's a passage in the Bible. See, we're distinguishing maybe from God from the Bible.
Right.
I think you're reading the NIV version. If you read the King James version, it says things a little bit differently.
I'll quote you the King James Version. Let not a woman wear that which pertaineth to a man. And that was interpreted to mean no pants. And in fact,
well, I wear pants every day, and I don't think God hates me for it.
Well,
I think God
well, you and I
still loves me, even though I wear pants every day, and I wear shorts, and, you know, I wear short sleeves. And
well, you and I are in agreement there, but I mean, you wear what you want up to a point. but
you're saying King James doesn't.
When I go out dressed or anything like that.
But I'm telling you, the King James Version that I just quoted you was used for centuries to tell a woman she should not wear clothes that were men's clothes. And that was up until the 20th century. Now, that changed sometime in the 20th century.
I'm sure that has changed in some time, because back then men probably dressed a lot different than what they do now.
Well,
so I believe, you know, that may have a lot to do with it as well. I'm not sure how men dress, but I wouldn't want to have dressed like a man back then.
I'm 81.
When it was written, it was actually written, it doesn't really apply to today's.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, you know, what is religious also sometimes becomes social custom.
Yeah.
And when I was in college in the 60s, women were not allowed to wear pants on campus at the state university before 6 p.m. If you did, you could be suspended from school.
Yeah.
Could not wear slacks on campus.
Yes, that is I definitely disagree with that. That is not right. I believe women should dress how they feel comfortable.
And
it's not comfortable to wear a dress all the time.
But the roots of that policy at the university I attended in Kansas were in the teachings of some of the religions who believed that women should not wear clothes that were like men's.
And that passage.
Yes, that's people.
And
people will say this and that and the other. But God is different than what people are.
But yet Joe just quoted the King James Version, so that's the Bible.
Well, I think what our caller is doing is what any sensible person is going to do. And you have literature, and some parts of that literature makes good sense, and some parts of it doesn't make as much sense. And she's using.
You have to remember that the Bible has been translated over and over and over and over and over again, and you have to use common sense to understand it.
Well, you know, there's a really good quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton that seems to fit right in with this discussion, because she said the only difference between us, and she was referring to people of the Judeo-Christian faith, is that we, the suffragists in that case, or the women, say that these degrading ideas of women emanated from the brain of man, while the church says they come from God. And that pretty well sums up
That's
her
a good
view of it
summary,
as
yeah.
well.
That is, yes, I believe that
Well,
a lot of things came from man and
yeah.
not God.
I
Well-
think you'd like Elizabeth Cady Stanton if you got to know her.
Because a man wrote the Bible, you know, and they translated it from word to word to word to word, from language to language to language.
Let me tell you something
correct.
funny, see what you think.
Alrighty.
The epistle to the Hebrews, nobody knows who really wrote it. And so they had a lot of speculation, one of which was a particular woman in the New Testament wrote it. And some men said, no, it's too rational.
I would believe that. I believe that men maybe in the past have tried to repress women and make them more, you know, do what they would want them to do
Well,
instead of what God would want them to do.
So, Amanda, we want to thank you for calling. And can we ask, are you local? And have you
Yes,
watched?
I am.
Oh, yeah.
Have you watched
I watch
us
your
before?
program all the time.
Oh,
Have you
thank
ever called in before? I don't think I recognize your voice.
No,
but-
I've never. This is my first time calling in. I just, you know, I've seen the show and, you know, I've watched it several times, but I've never really felt this passionate about calling in before.
Well, I hope you feel passionate again. You make good sense.
Well, Wanda came and did a program for the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
We have these 2-hour-long programs, and it was a delightful 2 hours. And I guess I should ask, will you be doing that program for anyone locally in the near future where Amanda could visit?
I'll be doing it for the East Tennessee Lawyers Association for Women, which is open for everyone, at the YWCA I think it's next Wednesday. I'll have to double
All
check.
right.
And then we'll be doing it in Oak Ridge for the League of Women Voters on November the 12th.
All right. So I think what we'll try and do is we have a Freethought TV Facebook page. And I think what we'll do is we'll try and post, if you can feed us when you're going to do this the next time.
Give the Facebook.
Well, I think you just have to do Freethought Forum TV on Facebook and look for it. So Amanda, we'd like to say thank you and free up the line. But it's been great talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much for letting me talk.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you, Amanda. Appreciate it.
And anytime you want to talk to me, I would be thrilled.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
That's
Thank you
wonderful.
much.
That's wonderful.
Well, hey, we're past the midpoint. Let's do the mid-program break. That'll give Wanda a chance to figure out where she is in her notes. Joe, can you find your mid-program break?
Well,
It
yeah,
says
right
page
here.
103.
Is this it?
Yeah, program break, yeah. I go first. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded by them jointly and by individual contributions. Shows are live most Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on community access television. It's Channel 6 and Channel 12, depending upon your cable system. And because I live in Blount County, I don't know which one's which. You can tell all of your out-of-town friends to see us streaming online at ctvknox.org.
Okay, and it's a call-in show, and we are alive. And this is November 12, 2013, and viewers can call in to the number on the screen if you would look with comments or questions. And now let's go for an informative break.
Please call while we're on the break.
And are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone.
All right.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people.
Well, if viewers are hearing us, I want to let them know that both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you'll find that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. All right. Well, we got about 13 minutes left of the program. We got time for a quick call, but we also have plenty of things to discuss. One of the things I thought was cool about the story of Elizabeth Cady Stanton was her Declaration of Rights and Sentiments. Well, it was published, or it was a joint effort, but I think she was the principal author. And this occurred during the 1848 First Women's Convention. Am I even describing that correctly?
That's correct. That's correct. It was the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York.
And I guess that's why my book talks about the ladies of Seneca Falls.
There you go. That's part of it. That was something that actually Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton decided to call the meeting to have a public hearing on women's rights. That grew out of their experience of being excluded from the abolitionist convention when they went to as delegates. And finally, the convention compromised and allowed them to sit behind a veil and not speak.
I think they were in a balcony too,
Yes.
so they weren't on the main
No,
floor.
they weren't.
Do you remember some of the comments that men made regarding women's?
Well, a lot of it was what they called natural law. It's just not natural for women to speak or to have a voice, really, in the government.
Not natural, huh?
And not natural. So, I mean, it's pretty ironic when you think it's a world convention of people who are there to fight slavery, who are saying to some of their own members that they can't be treated equally. They can't speak, they can't be seen, they have to be...
And they didn't see the obvious contradiction.
Well, they didn't.
Well, certainly many did, though.
That's William Lloyd Garrison was not there when the vote was taken, and he came back to the convention and sat with the women.
Sat with the women.
In a show of solidarity, which I think shows some people. But the truth is, 100 years from now, people will look at us and say, how could we believe some of the things we say and still accept and do some of the things we do sort of by rote or custom? I kind of fear that.
Well,
at some point that'll be a problem. But
well, probably the basics, the rock bottom of rational thinking is detecting inconsistencies.
Correct.
And our kids are real good at that. So that's encouraging.
Right. I hope they will. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton couldn't tolerate the Declaration of Independence that gave rights to men, declared the rights of men, and ignored the women.
All men are created equal.
All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so when she got ready for the convention, she did the Declaration of Sentiments. And in that declaration, she said that all men and women are created equal. And she called for correction of a number of the things that she felt were ways that the law oppressed women. And in particular, she called for the right to vote. And that caused a firestorm.
Within the Women's Rights Convention?
At the conventions. There were 67 women who co-sponsored that, signed on to sponsor the convention.
Go ahead.
And a number of them resigned in embarrassment because of that outrageous demand for the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's husband, who was a leading international abolitionist, was so embarrassed by her demand for the right to vote that he left town for 3 weeks and refused to return because of his embarrassment. Her father opposed it. He'd been a judge and a congressman and a lawyer, and he opposed the right to vote.
He opposed the right to vote, or opposed the right to act, or opposed asking for it as perhaps it would alienate. Meaning, were they arguing over the appropriateness of it or the tactics of how to achieve improvement?
I don't think they were talking about tactics at Seneca Falls yet. They were identifying the problem primarily. And a lot of men just were so accustomed to women not voting and to them controlling things the way they like to in their cigar-filled rooms and voting in the saloons. A lot of the voting was in saloons where women were not expected to go or permitted to go, or at least women that were nice women were not supposed to be in the saloons. And so they just came at it with a different world experience. But there she was, opposed by her husband, opposed by her father. The women who joined in the convention were resigning, and the resolution almost failed. If it had not been for Frederick Douglass, who was himself a freed slave, if he hadn't been there to speak up, then the odds are it would have failed. But he very eloquently supported the suffrage plank.
You know, I could see this in my youth, this contradiction. I'll give you an example. I had an uncle who had a business, but his wife ran it. He didn't know enough to run the business, but it was his business, and it went just fine as long as he stayed out of it. And I went fishing with him a lot as a kid.
Keep him away.
You know, what was interesting is this woman who, my Aunt Elizabeth, was not permitted as a kid to learn to read, but she could count, and she had great relations with people. She could run an entire business. It was a service station and a general store.
Wow.
And her husband mostly sat around and talked about the second coming of Jesus.
Well, and he took credit for her work.
And he took credit
There's a
for
lot
the
of
work.
that.
Well,
It's
yeah.
a long history of men taking the credit.
All right. Well, I had learned about Frederick Douglass's participation at the Seneca Falls Convention probably when I read the book, The History of Freethought by Susan Jacoby. And I went online and also learned how after the convention, Frederick Douglass, in a publication of his own called The North Star, wrote in support of their effort. And I found a small quote from that I'd like to share with people. In respect to political rights, we hold women to be justly entitled to all we claim for man. We go farther and express our conviction that all political rights which it is expedient for man to exercise, it is equally so for women. All that distinguishes man as an intelligent and accountable being is true of woman. And if that government is only just which governs by the free consent of the governed, there can be no reason in the world for denying to women the exercise of the elective franchise, or a hand in making and administering the laws of our land. Our doctrine is that right is of no sex. And I am just dazzled by his eloquence as well. I've read his autobiography, and learned that he actually learned to read almost not exactly surreptitiously. He'd gotten a little bit of help from one of the wives of an owner until her husband found out what she was doing and said, "You can't do that. He'll want to rebel and run away." And then she stopped. And then he would look for discarded newspapers to sneak home and read at night. And what a neat guy he is as well. All right.
But he and Elizabeth Cady Stanton fell out sometime later.
Well, so after the Civil War came the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
That's
and
correct.
I guess it's the 15th Amendment gave men the right to vote. So what happened then?
Men of all races.
Men of all races. There we
White
go.
men.
Yeah.
White men already had the right to vote.
There we go. There we go.
And that was 50 years before women ultimately got the right to vote.
Half a
Men were at
century.
least given the legal right. I know there were problems, as there always are, to some extent. But what happened was that the women who had supported abolition and then became involved in the suffrage movement, continued to support abolition and continued to support what they called universal suffrage, which was not just the right for women to vote, but for all citizens to vote. So when the 14th Amendment was passed in the wake of the Civil War, and it defined citizenship as people who were born or naturalized in America, they believed that made them citizens. And so that's when they began the effort to vote, and some of them got arrested and some of those stories. But just before those amendments were passed, when they were being considered in Congress, the women pushed to have the 13th Amendment grant not just right to men, black men or former slaves, but to women, all women. And ultimately, unfortunately, Frederick Douglass and others decided that this was, as it got referred to, quote, the Negro hour, quote, and they would go forward. It would be easier for them to get the 13th Amendment passed and leave the women behind. And that is a wound that I don't think Elizabeth Cady Stanton ever quite got over. She got quite upset.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I'm pretty sure I saw references to correspondences between her and Frederick Douglass after that event.
Much later, and that was when he got married. He married a white woman.
Oh, that's right. And I think she defended them, so to speak,
yes,
socially.
She defended his right to marry a white woman, and that. And so, you know, her thinking continued consistently, but she was deeply wounded by being left behind.
Well, it was specifically the breach that occurred between women and black Americans over those amendments that were covered in my 10th grade history class. And I'm sure I would have learned the name Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass in that context if I hadn't heard of Frederick Douglass before. He's important enough that he may have been talked about in his own right during discussion of abolition.
When would you think in high school students began to learn about the movement for women's rights?
Now?
Yeah. Because I remember none of it in high school. None of it.
I don't think there was any. When I was in school, there certainly wasn't much information at all. That one sentence didn't say much, and what it said was inaccurate.
Yeah.
Well, in 1975, in Minnesota, we spent a non-trivial amount of time on it.
Well, women's history or women's studies had come into being in the 70s, and there was a push in the colleges to revive that history and that information. And even now, we really don't have it archived well. My group, the Suffrage Coalition group, works hard to locate and preserve women's history, to get it digitized and make it available.
Which reminds me, we don't have much time left, but Wanda here has run a nonprofit that has put the statue of the three suffragettes, or however the term is.
Suffragists.
Suffragists.
Yeah,
it's English, it's suffragettes.
No, eds.
Forget the ed.
It's a diminutive, okay. Up on Market Square.
Yes.
And you're working for a new statue?
Yes, we are.
And we got
great.
less than a minute.
To honor the legislator that broke the tie in the Tennessee legislature. Gave us the right to vote, because Tennessee was the final important state, and his mother, who wrote the letter that persuaded him to change his mind.
Yeah, what'd she say to him?
And she told him to be a good boy and vote for suffrage.
That's great. He was 27 years of age. Yeah.
And his mother, Feb.
Well, that's great. Well, we got 30 seconds left. Joe, let's see if we can do the close up here real quick. It's time to start wrapping things up. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. Please send us feedback. Leave us a voicemail at 865-272-9060. And then freethoughtforum at yahoo.com.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our guest, Wanda, for taking the time out of her busy schedule to be with us here today. And to Sam, Jonas, and all of our callers, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's great. That's great.
So I say suffragettes, probably because
say it.
So I probably because that was actually how the term used in 75.
Yeah.
But also,
But that's just
but also,
ignorance.
well, it's different usage. But there's the other. Well, you actually addressed it in your
The
program
suffrages,
when
though.
you talked about